Tonight, on Louisiana, the state we're in.
A high-tech company wants to build a plant in your town. They say it will bring jobs. They say it won't pollute. Then they tell you it processes uranium. Is this small Louisiana town ready for a uranium enrichment plant? Plus, the new Secretary of the Department of Environmental Quality speaks in his first extended television interview.
From LPB, this is Louisiana's statewide news magazine. With correspondents Jeff Duay and Arcy Chopper. From LPB, here's Robert Collins.
Good evening. This evening we'll talk with the new head of the Department of Environmental Quality. This is Secretary Dale Givens' first week on the job, and we'll ask him how he plans to run the state's environmental programs. Our top story also has to do with the environment, involving claims of environmental racism in North Louisiana. In 1989, when Claiborne Parish leaders put out the welcome mat for a uranium enrichment plant, not everybody there joined the welcoming party. Some people who live in the area where Louisiana Energy Services, LES, wants to build its plant are still up in arms. This week, the federal EPA held 2 hearings to collect public opinion on the proposed $800 million project. The parish police jury also had an opportunity to thwart the construction of the plant. It has been a busy week in the quiet town of Homer. Jeff Duay started covering this story more than 4 years ago, and he has this update on a small town's odyssey of controversy.
Whatever we ask for in prayer, believe it, we shall receive it.
In a small church near the small town of Homer, Louisiana, neighbors have come together to pray for help.
We in a fight. And Father God, we're asking of you, Jesus, just lead the way.
Divine assistance is requested tonight, but this group doesn't need a miracle in their struggle. They need to be organized.
We have a lot of people have given up. But when y'all talk to your people, this thing is not yet about over with.
Since we started this fight, we have already raised and spent over $100,000. But LES has spent $36 million. That's not a bad swap.
They call themselves Citizens Against Nuclear Trash, CANT, CANT. For more than 5 years, they've been working to spread a message that they will not be ignored. They have a fight on their hands. Some here believe it's more than the fight of their lives. It could be a fight for their lives.
Why do you think that everybody is dying with cancer in Louisiana?
Okay.
It's got to be because we have more pollution than any other state in the United States.
If it was in danger, they wouldn't have put this plant in a black community, making that kind of money in this lower place. This should be in a bigger town, a bigger population, with more money, more educated people. Most of the people around here don't have that kind of education.
CANT began in 1989. That's when the senior senator from Louisiana, J. Bennett Johnston, stood in front of this parish's antebellum courthouse in Homer to say the town could, if it played its cards right, be the future home of a high-tech industry. To the working men and women of Claiborne Parish, he promised a uranium enrichment plant.
They didn't try to bring that plant in. I went after the plant because I knew, I had seen these kind of plants in Europe. I knew what their business is. I've long been satisfied as to the absolute safety of these plants.
That's when the fight began. Parish leaders embraced the plant, even promising by resolution to reroute a road that stood in the facility's way.
I have been here a long time and I would hate to leave.
There were, and still are, people living along that road.
Because if the plant come, I would have to go.
Why would you have to go?
Because it's dangerous. That plant is dangerous. That's what people telling us, and I believe it is.
These plants are not put in predominantly white areas. You know, they're put in areas where poor black areas where they're going to meet the least resistance.
This plant will absolutely ruin Homer, not only out here and in the lake, but Homer as well. In fact, it practically already has ruined Homer because there are people for the plant, people against it. They don't want to associate with you.
It split the town?
Right.
The company that wants to build the plant is called Louisiana Energy Services. It wants to distill uranium here in gas-filled centrifuges. The separated, usable isotope would be packed into pellets and rods somewhere else and eventually fuel the nation's commercial nuclear power plants. Nuclear fuel rods like this array inside Louisiana's River Bend nuclear plant now come exclusively from government factories.
But if the LES facility is built in Claiborne Parish, it would be the first privately owned nuclear enrichment center in the nation.
It's going to provide some jobs. I think it's going to be a clean industry. I think they're going to monitor it, and I'm happy it's coming.
Even before the plant was announced, local officials were treated to European jaunts to visit similar uranium enrichment plants. Dr. Nelson Philpott was, for years, the head of the local agricultural experiment station. He went on one of those trips to Holland, Britain, and Germany. An expert in bovine disease, he returned with a glowing review of what he saw.
As we arrived at Grinnell, the thing that struck me, particularly because of my background as an agricultural scientist, was the fact that grain was growing on the site, literally where the lawns should normally be, which would be used in the human food chain. And behind the centrifuge facility, there were the European-type community gardens, the food being used for human consumption. That gave me a great deal of assurance, because if there was anything getting out of those buildings, then there would be a problem. There was no problem.
Despite the reviews from their neighbors, the people of the small communities closest to the site were unimpressed. In fact, they still feel downright betrayed at gross missteps by their leaders. One example they say they'll remember for all time is their senator trying to allay fears of radiation.
This is an ordinary dish that you buy at the supermarket. You can tell it's just full of, by the way, I don't want to eat off one of these things.
Of course, that's not an ordinary plate. Orange Fiesta ware was made with uranium oxide and has been banned since the 40s.
You said it was an ordinary plate that you could buy at any supermarket.
No, I did not. This is an ordinary dish that you buy at the supermarket. You can tell.
When LES come to my home and brought some crystal glass or rocks or something in a jar, and they said it was uranium. And they pulled it out in your hand. They said you can just hold it in your hand and it won't even hurt. And well, I didn't know nothing about the stuff at that time, but as time rolled on, I learned more about it, and I found out you can't hold that stuff in your hand.
This week, better than 5 years after plans for the Claiborne site were unveiled, CANT members were still trying to hold back the uranium plant. This night, they were organizing for a protest march in the morning.
If the street is full of y'all, when the people come in here from EPA, they will see that it's not under control. And also, when they go back, they will report that. So y'all, let's get somebody out on the street, Thursday morning at 9 o'clock.
Thursday morning, 4, maybe 5 men stand on the sidewalk in front of the Claiborne Parish government building. No signs, no slogans, certainly no blocking traffic, and hardly noticed by anyone. For all the fire and vigor of the night before, there is barely a demonstration at all.
We've asked repeatedly LES to bring forth their information. They did surveys. Who is in favor of this plant and who isn't? We think that the majority of the people in Claiborne Parish don't even want this plant. And again, we're going to keep bringing this back. We are going to continue fighting it as long as it takes.
Inside, it's a slightly more cantankerous scene. CANT has had some victories in their fight. Roy Martis, a CANT supporter, was elected to replace a plant supporter. It happened again recently. Another parish commissioner was elected who may also vote against the plant. The issue at this week's meeting of the Claiborne Parish Police Jury, whether these town fathers might rescind the parish's offer to reroute the road and thus stall the uranium plant.
We saw fit to go with the people over the project in past, with the halfway house, with the low-level waste dump, with some roads concerns around the lake. And we all kind of looked at it, and there were some projects that we might have want done, but once we saw that the will of the people were that they wanted it as it were, we leaned towards the people. We have been consistency in kind of serving and leaning towards our people. And I would just ask that same thing would be considered out there in my area. I was not the jury person at that particular time, but I am now, and I've been re-elected. So I would ask that in the form of a motion that that resolution be rescinded, until which time we could do a further study on it.
The motion is to rescind a resolution of the jury of, am I saying right, October 26,
October 26,
1989. Is there a second to that motion?
Second. Joe. Abstain.
Okay. Ed.
No.
The environmentalist fell a vote short.
So we got
the motion is denied.
Yeah, that's right.
They are not concerned about us out there in Forest Grove and Center Spring. They are not concerned about our children. They are not concerned about the school. They are not concerned about anything, the water either. Because if they reroute that road, they're going to have to reroute the water line too. And when I knew about that and what they was going to do, I read it in the paper. No one come through, and they pretend they done took a survey and come through and talk to the people in the community. But no one ever come through and talk to me.
North and south of where Louisiana Energy Services wants to build its plant, CANT has erected mocking signs. Across the highway is the community of Arizona. Once the railroad was set to come through here, it instead went through Homer. This is now Homer. This is now the town of Arizona. Mr. R.T. Ellis.
Well, Arizona is an old Indian trading post about a mile south of here, and years ago it was the original road from what they call Mount Lebanon, which is down below Arcadia, from there into Arkansas. This was the road that went north.
Is it possible the communities here on the outskirts of Homer are missing another big chance to be more than a historical footnote? Mary Boyd speaks for LES.
Oh, but it occurs to me that far more people are in favor of this project. We've had wonderful support for this project from day one when it was announced. And so while we understand that certainly it has caused some concern and unhappiness among some folks, and for which we regret, we are confident that in the long run, even the folks who today are against it will begin to accept it as part of the community, but that's probably many years down the road. But for right now, we've been very pleased by the support that we have in this parish.
How many jobs do you say you'll generate?
During construction, we expect about 400 jobs at the peak of construction, and during operation, about 180 positions, full-time, permanent. And the majority of those, about 2/3 to 3/4, we expect to be filled by Claiborne Parish residents and people from the surrounding region.
This is the site, 442 now clear-cut acres in northwestern Louisiana, just below the Arkansas border, north-central Claiborne Parish. Land around here goes for $300 to $400 an acre, even with timber on it. LES must have wanted the site badly. They paid $1,200 an acre. But why here? Why locate one of the world's most industrially sophisticated gas centrifuges to spin out uranium in a parish whose principal economic base is fast-growing lobleaf pine? Why locate a uranium enrichment plant in rural Claiborne Parish?
Well, first, why Louisiana? Northern Louisiana is very technically appropriate for our site because it has very low possibility of a damaging earthquake, and that's important for the reliability of our equipment. We're also in Louisiana because of the strong support of Senator J. Bennett Johnston, who's very knowledgeable about energy matters, having headed the Senate Energy Committee.
A low-level waste dump was supposed to came in here in '87 in the other folks' neighborhood. They didn't want it. They voted it out. Now it come back in '89 across the track in our neighborhood. Why can't we vote it out? We can't even get a vote. Now what you call that?
Mary Boyd came in here with this plant talking about LES, and this plant is so good, and this plant is a real good plant. And it's a clean plant. It's squeaky clean. You can just eat ice cream off the floor. And they done, I tell you what they did. They started telling lies in the beginning, and they still telling lies.
Claiborne Parish also has a strong reputation for having an excellent workforce. And since we would be employing those folks, we wanted to, of course, be in an area where people are very receptive to hard work, but this will give them an opportunity for clean, high-tech jobs.
To those people in Forest Grove and Center Springs, right around where the plant would be built, they have a concern that this is
radiation, this is uranium. That means something different, I think, mentally to people than simple chemicals. Have you done anything wrong in communicating to them what this is about?
We have worked very hard to communicate with them, and I feel very concerned for people who have genuine concerns. And if we have not done a good job in that regard, then it is very regrettable. But we have a long history of providing information and on-site tours. Many people in Forest Grove and Center Springs were invited to see these plants in Europe. So every opportunity has been made for people to get information. And we certainly continue to do that. And we do regret that there are people who are unhappy about the project, but we also know that there are a lot of people who are very happy about it, and some of them do live in Forest Grove and Center Springs.
The Sierra Club Legal Defense Fund is a formidable band of environmental attorneys helping CANT fight the uranium plant. This week, attorney Natalie Walker strode into federal court in Baton Rouge in another challenge to LES and the state over approval of the Homer plant.
DEQ has not done the analysis of the environmental impacts and the harms that will come as a consequence of issuing air permits and water permits to LES to pollute our air and waterways. The proper analysis hasn't been done by the department.
Whenever that issue is decided, whatever the outcome of inevitable legal challenges CANT and environmental attorneys erect, Claiborne Parish will never be the same. Whether it gets its uranium plant or not, some people of a small town have stood up.
We're fighting a case here now, and look like the #1 thing that we would be able to win this case is the fact that there's environmental racism going on, and that's not just here. We finna be introduced to it. We're being introduced to it right now. But this has been an ongoing thing, not just in Louisiana, but throughout the nation.
I don't have that very much knowledge of uranium enrichment, but I sure have studied and have learned something about it. And I had common sense to know when I got into this and know what it wasn't anything good for us out there. Because if it had been, police, jury here at home, and no one else would have put it out there, or tried to put it out there.
The State Department of Environmental Quality did not participate in the arguments Tuesday in the case brought against it by the Sierra Club Legal Defense Fund.
Eye on America. Tonight, black and white working together to fight deep pockets in the Deep South.
All they do really is make statements to the fact that we should trust them. We won't buy that. We want hard data. We want proof.
This is the CBS Evening News. In tonight's Eye on America, a battle over a project no one wants in his backyard. This story may sound familiar, but this one has a twist. As correspondent Bob Fall reports, the battle is being fought by some unlikely allies.
So good to see you.
This sight is rarely seen in northern Louisiana, where the Klan is still active.
Yeah, boy.
Blacks and whites working together.
You know the reason, don't you? You're trying to save the environment. That's what's important now.
Not what color you are.
No.
They are fighting what would be the nation's first privately owned uranium enrichment plant, which would pump millions of dollars into this depressed community.
The people who support us in that community and we ourselves think that we're the best thing that's going to happen to that community for many, many years.
If it's built, it gets built here. 450 wooded acres, once owned and sold for a small fortune by a friend of Louisiana Senator Bennett Johnston, and surrounded by two communities which are nearly all black.
I just think they picked it because it was a black neighborhood.
And you couldn't fight back.
And blacks nearby, as well as whites, say their isolated town can do without lethal accidents which have plagued other enrichment plants.
Hexafluoride gas, that's what killed them. Burn their eyes, burn their nose, burn their lungs like that. They were dead.
All they do really is make statements to the fact that we should trust them. We won't buy that. We want hard data. We want proof.
They also complain that taxes and jobs the plant would generate have been grossly exaggerated, and that the dismal safety record at the government's enrichment plants have been grossly ignored.
Every one of these places that has processed uranium is a polluted disaster. I don't believe that this is going to be the Immaculate Conception.
The companies that want to build the plant insist that race had nothing to do with the site selection and that most people in the community welcome the project.
Many of those who are opposed do not have their foundation in fact. They have it in superstition and unfounded fears, in my opinion.
They don't know what they're talking about in plain English.
That would be my opinion.
So the dispute has become a classic case of corporate power and power politics. Louisiana Energy not only sent delegations of local citizens to inspect comparable plants in Europe, it also distributed a slick videotape. Louisiana Energy also offered cash gifts to 2 black churches. Both rejected the money.
We felt like it might have been payoff money. I felt like I was offended. They couldn't get me one way, maybe get us another way.
Coming to Claiborne Parish is Louisiana Energy.
Senator Johnston also told Congress that uranium from the plant would be as safe as this dinnerware. Unaware, he said later, the plate was taken off the market because it was radioactive.
You said it was an ordinary plate that you could buy at any supermarket.
No, I did not. This is an ordinary dish that you buy at the supermarket.
Louisiana's senior Senator Bennett Johnston, who announced the project on these courthouse steps, twice changed federal law to permit speedier construction. Records also show that Johnston received a $10,000 campaign contribution from the company which will design the plant. Johnston denies doing anything improper and confident that the plant will be built. Louisiana Energy says it will make a profit. But critics note the market is already glutted with uranium and that there is no place to dispose of the 4,200 tons of radioactive waste the plant would generate every year.
We're now going to have even more tonnage of this stuff with no place to put it. I mean, it's really a scam.
But for blacks and whites who had been suspicious of one another, there has already been a winner.
Very slowly has brought us together in this tight-knit, cooperative, trusting relationship. That's been the payday.
We're not trying to cause trouble or anything else, Lord. All we want to do is strive for what's right.
This is Bob Faw in Homer, Louisiana for Eye on America.
And that's part of our world tonight. Coming up on this CBS station, an especially interesting report.
It was the fact that there's environmental racism going on, and that's not just here. We finna be introduced to it. We're being introduced to it right now.
Members of Citizens Against Nuclear Trash lined the walls of the police jury room in Claiborne Parish. Others stood outside. They were all angry about the possibility of having a uranium plant in the Forest Grove and Center Springs neighborhood.
And we have been really in legal, in court basically with LES for 6 years now. We're going to have to continue that fight. And gentlemen, we certainly don't want to have to continue that fight here against the police jury.
CANT's presence prompted the police jury to rescind an earlier resolution which allows the plant's owners, Louisiana Energy Services, to detour a road through the minority community. It's a small victory which gives the group more time to fight the $855 million plant, a plant they say will ruin their health and their land.
And I had common sense to know when I got into this and know what it was. It wasn't anything good for us out there.
Anytime you embark on something this big that affects this many people for the good, you're always going to find a small group that is against us. So what is going on is not unexpected at all.
This is the Forest Grove community, and about 1.5 miles down the road is where they plan to build a uranium enrichment plant. To say that the residents here are upset about the plant is an understatement. They're downright livid.
Just think about it now, how people would do you. They don't care about the black people.
LES is still waiting for license approval from the Nuclear Regulatory Committee. The Environmental Protection Agency is in Homer to gauge public opinion, but in the small minority community of Forest Grove and Center Springs, the message is clear.
If God is in there, we won't lose.
In Homer, Michelle Sampson, TV8 News.
For much of the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, for example, the United States Supreme Court was the forum public interest lawyers almost automatically turned to for relief against injustice. Today, the first Monday in October always marks the beginning of a new Supreme Court term, so of course, it is a special day for the public interest bar. This forum is about to issue a challenge. to a new generation of law students as well as lawyers and judges to re-energize the law with a sense of justice that informed the greatest Supreme Court decisions. It was 40 years ago that one of the great leaders of the public law movement, Thurgood Marshall, convinced the Supreme Court on which he would later sit to hold school segregation unconstitutional.
We tried to get it through the executive, and that no president would do anything at all. And then we tried Congress, and Congress wouldn't do anything at all. And so it ended up, it was either going to be done by the courts or not done at all. So that's why we went to the courts. Now we get criticized for having gone to the courts. Well, there was no other way to do it.
And a couple of years after the Brown decision, an indigent man named Clarence Earl Gideon made constitutional history. A Florida judge denied his plea that a lawyer be appointed to defend him at his criminal trial. The Gideon case was dramatized in this movie starring Henry Fonda as Mr. Gideon.
I said I want you to appoint a lawyer to represent me in this trial.
Mr. Gideon, I'm sorry, but I cannot appoint counsel to represent you in this case. Under the laws of the state of Florida, the only time the court can appoint counsel to represent a defendant is when that person has been charged with a capital offense.
I'm entitled to a lawyer.
Let the record show that the defendant asked the court to appoint counsel to represent him in the trial. The court denied the request.
Gideon took his plea for a public defender to the Supreme Court and won. In a far-reaching decision, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that every person accused of a crime is entitled to a lawyer. And then came Baker versus Carr, which insisted that an urban voter's ballot should carry as much weight as a farmer's. This principle of one person, one vote seems self-evident today, but it took volunteer civil liberties lawyers many years and many attempts to make that principle a reality in the United States. And a series of important decisions in the 1960s and early 70s recognized the rights of children and of mental patients, protected freedom of speech and association, and provided great momentum to the movement for gender equality, including a woman's right to control her own body.